In this video, I'm going to talk about two subjects that actually are one in the same, but I've realized how they merge together in a way that is, well, horrifying, and that is appropriate because the subject is horror. And I wanted to talk about how I have reevaluated the whole genre of horror. You all know that, you've heard me talk about analog horror before, and my fondness for it as a genre, as a sort of homemade genre. People, creative people, just using their talents, working from home, not having to work through studios or go to film school or anything, but just churning out this material that's really a lot of it's really really good. But it is, a particular brand of the genre called horror, and I want to merge my discussion of horror with something that one of you requested from me. Now, this is a request I got from one person. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name right now. I don't remember the name of the person who requested this. But, I always read my comments, which isn't, I don't get that many comments. So I'm not really saying, oh, I'm such a cool guy, I read all my comments, because, it's not like I'm PewDiePie up here getting, millions of comments a day. But anyway, one of you asked if I could talk about the Franklin scandal and how that was such a formative thing for me. And the thing is, I feel like I've talked about this before, and I know I have talked about this before. I know that I've even talked about it. I think I talked about it on a couple of other podcasts. So for those of you who are just like, oh, no wiki, again with the Franklin scandal, come on. But so if that's how you feel, I understand, and you don't have to watch the rest of this video. But I did want to honor this one person's request, and also just because I think most of what I had to say about the Franklin scandal is now lost. It's gone. It's part of the cache of videos, or cache. I don't know how you say it, cache or cache of videos. The bunch of videos that I recorded up through late 2020 that were eventually just nukes by YouTube, and I had to start all over. Am I still bitter about that? You bet your ass I am. Do I hate YouTube? You bet your ass I do. Am I still using it? Yes, I'm still using it. But as my backup channel will tell you, YouTube is my whore. I'm using it for my own purposes. Me using YouTube does not mean that I endorse it. So I think most of the things about the Franklin scandal are now gone. Most of the things that I recorded on my own channel concerning the Franklin scandal are now gone. I think I did a couple of videos where I talk about it. And there are a couple videos that I did. Maybe it was just one video that I did when I was in Omaha, Nebraska, at the site of the infamous savings and loan place that was owned by Larry King. Not that Larry King, not the one you're thinking of, but the one who's involved with the Franklin scandal. And I did a walk and talk, where I was picturing myself walking around this now deserted site where apparently this great evil was taking root. So I want to talk about two things at the same time, and they're really, again, one subject: horror, and how I've grown to see horror very differently than I used to see it, and the Franklin scandal, which is a real life horror, and that kind of fits in with my overall reappraisal of horror as a genre is because there is so much horror that is unfortunately true to life. And I'm not just talking about the scary things, in life that we all have to face naturally. I mean, the horror of death and disease and all those sorts of things. I'm talking about the horror of, well, just to put it in a shorthand, man's inhumanity to man. The depravity of the powers that be, when you really look at them closely, and you see them for who or what they really are. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s. I grew up, I became more or less sentient in the 80s. In the 70s, I was just running around having a good time, doing little boy things. But in the 80s, I became pop culture aware, and that was the time when horror was, was in a real resurgence, I suppose, pop culturally speaking. You had the magazine Fangoria, which I didn't subscribe to, but I think it was put out by the same people who put out Starlog magazine, which I did subscribe to. I was a fan of science fiction. I was not a fan of horror back then. Unlike most teenagers, and I became a teenager in the 80s eventually, in 1984. But unlike most preteens and teens, and teens who wanted to be cool and stuff, I really had no interest in all the schlocky horror vehicles, cinematic franchises that were everywhere in the 80s. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. What was the other one? Halloween. Yeah. Of course, the Halloween went beyond the 80s. I guess those were the big three, but of course there were all sorts of copycats and everything. And what was called the slasher film, the golden age of the slasher movie. It always just kind of struck me as boring as a premise. It didn't, it seemed very formulaic, and I still don't have much of an interest in going back and watching any of those movies, just because it just doesn't seem. It just seems like, okay, there's a killer on the loose and he's killing these kids, or one by one, and they're all dying, and it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't seem all that interesting. But I also had a dislike of horror because my sense of horror at the time was that it was sort of something that was supposed to leave you feeling bad, leave you feeling like you're in danger, you're unempowered, you can't defend yourself, the bad guys are going to come and get you. That was very against my whole aesthetic. I was a Dudley Do-Right, I had the Dudley Do-Right kind of mentality. I liked movies and books that were about fighting, good versus evil, and not ones that focused on evil and said evil's going to win, basically, and didn't really go into much detail about the whole fight, the perennial fight between good and evil, and what the actual dimensions of evil are, what constitutes evil. These are much more interesting questions that make for, I think, more interesting types of horror. I think at the time I understood horror I looked at horror in a negative light, because it seemed like horror movies were mostly about glorifying glorifying the horror, and people like would go to these movies just to get off on the killer's still alive. We thought he was dead, but now he's still alive because evil never dies. And that just was kind of a drag to me. It just didn't appeal. Now, what came to interest me somewhat, however, was not evil just as some killer wearing a hockey mask or whatever, but evil as evil in a more, I don't know, sophisticated light. And when I say sophisticated, I don't mean less frightening. I mean just more nuanced and complex, And I think that the original Star Wars trilogy, in the depiction of Darth Vader and then later the Emperor, we got a depiction of evil there in those two characters, even though we didn't know everything about their backstories, especially not the Emperor. We didn't really know much about his backstory at all. But I think there was still something, very primal and very powerful about both of those characters. Darth Vader being, who we learned was this tragic character, even though, he's scary as hell. And he's this huge, hulking creature, half man, half machine, talking about transhumanism, right? Wearing this death mask, and, force choking people and just kicking ass left and right, and, not somebody you want to mess with. But we later find out that his entire, his fall, was what, set the stage for everything. His fall from grace, his fall from goodness, his being seduced by the dark side, which was only, again, implied in the original trilogy. In the prequel trilogy, they go into, you see the story, and unfortunately, they don't communicate the story as well or as powerfully as one would wish. I say that as someone who does not have prequel hate, though. I am generally a defender of the prequels, but I don't want to get into Star Wars lore too much here. And maybe, to be fair, I don't know, maybe Freddy was a kind of a more sophisticated evil personage, because he actually had a personality. I just never watched any of those movies, but I know that he wasn't just a somebody who lumbered around and never spoke and just killed people, but he talked and he made wisecracks, and he was sort of he had more of a personality. So maybe I shouldn't judge the Nightmare on Elm Street movies as harshly. Although I've come to think that the creator of those movies had certain demons, which affected his work, and that's all I'm gonna say about that right now. I'm not gonna go into any greater detail, but you can investigate it if you want. Let me just also say, to make your anti-hero character, to make the villain that people rooted for, into to have him be a child molester. That's pretty sus, as the kids would say these days, isn't it? Why would you want to do that? What would motivate you to do that as an auteur? One wonders. Well, I'm starting to see this is going to have to be another two-parter at least. So, because my camera does a thing where if I get too much past 20 minutes, it automatically splits it up into two. So I don't. In any case, I want to keep the episodes kind of bite-sized. So what more can I say? my evolving appreciation for horror. I mean, I think that, like I said, the examples of the Emperor and of Darth Vader in Star Wars, those are, it's definitely a horrifying undertone to the trilogy, to the original trilogy, that gives it a certain depth, even though these are not horror movies. And of course, I hate the Ewoks as much as anyone. Of course, that undermines the sense of menace, any proper sense of menace. Those little furry things. I think it was when I got older and started getting into literature more, and was reading things like Shakespeare, and coming across a villain like Iago in the play Othello. I blanked on the title for a second, but Iago is the villain in Othello, and he's a truly terrifying creature. Do I call him a man? I guess he's a man technically, but he's just somebody who just seems to be getting off on ruining his supposedly best friend's life. Making him, convincing him that his faithful wife is in fact cheating on him, and just making all these things, orchestrating all these things to happen to him, so that we see Othello just descend into madness and become a murderer. Become this reduced. Sorry for the spoilers, but it's a Shakespeare play. I think you can give out spoilers for a Shakespeare play and not be persecuted, but maybe not. Anyway, there's something just absolutely devastating about watching a character like Iago, who's masquerading as a nice guy, masquerading as a faithful friend, but who's making this good man lose his mind, as any one of us would do under the same circumstances, and reducing him to this, making him into a beast, which is what he becomes in the end, this murderous beast, who kills his wife, his faithful wife, his wife who's been faithful all along. And Iago, the way he works on him, the subtle psychological manner in which he gets in his mind, gets in his head. It's fascinating, but at the same time, this is not a play that I have a very easy time watching, just because I find it very unpleasant to see Iago just go unchecked for so long and fool so many people for so long, and to see Othello get mind fucked the way that he does. It's devastating. It's awful. So when you read a character like Iago, to a lesser extent, and Edmund in King Lear, who played a similar role of a manipulator of events, someone who convinced good people to do bad things and was sort of trying to orchestrate events all along, or a character like Macbeth, who's the main character, and then succumbs to the evil from within, because of his ambitions, that he wants to become king. He wants to rise through the ranks and be the most powerful one. And of course, he gets pushed along by his wife. So that's also a pretty devastating thing. Although it's less painful to see, because you know that Macbeth is kind of responsible. He's making these choices to become evil, and so it's still, it's still disturbing to see him make those kinds of choices. But with Othello, he just gets caught up in this mind game with this man who he mistakenly thinks is his friend, but is actually, the devil. And it's almost like his what happens to him just is beyond what any one of us would be able to control under the same circumstances. So it was in Shakespeare we see this vision of evil that is horror. I think linked to horror, that is thematically linked to the genre of horror, because horror is about evil, the evil being unleashed upon the world and the damage that it does to people. So I still haven't talked about how all this relates to Franklin Scandal, but I will in the next video. Thanks for watching this one. Talk to y'all soon.